Welcome to episode 10 in our story of the Norman Conquest of Ireland. In the previous episode, we followed Strongbow, who had set out from Dublin to deal with the Wexford Rebellion and where Robert Fitzstephen remained a prisoner. He marched south, fought his way through resistance in the Carlow region, and reached Wexford too late to recover him. The men of Wexford refused to hand Fitzstephen over, withdrew to Begarin Island, and according to the Song of Dermot and the Earl, burned Wexford as they went. And knowing he needed more allies, Strongbow turned to Donald More O'Brien of Thomond. As I mentioned last week, O'Brien was a surprising ally given that Donald had recently stood with Rory O'Connor outside Dublin. But this was 12th century Ireland, and alliances were often practical, temporary, and shaped by local rivalries. Donald was also connected to Strongbow through Dermot MacMurrough's family, since both men had married daughters of Dermot. Together, Strongbow and Donald moved against Ossory, and while their combined army successfully defeated the Ossory men, it did create a very interesting moment, and that was Maurice de Prendergast's protection of the King of Ossory. Maurice had guaranteed the king's safety. When the King of Ossory was threatened, Maurice defended his oath, even against Strongbow's political allies. We finished off last week with the reconciliation between Strongbow and King Henry II. Strongbow sacrificed his royal ambitions and agreed to be named Lord of Leinster, not King. So let's pick up the story today and talk a bit more about King Henry II. So, as I've established in previous episodes, Henry had several motives for intervening in Ireland. First of all, he feared Strongbow founding a rival Norman kingdom on his doorstep. Then we had the role of the Roman Church, who allegedly, with the Papal Bull Laudabiliter, authorised Henry II to invade Ireland and bring the Irish Church into greater conformity. Pope Adrian, the only English pope in history, was said to be behind this, but the exact nature of this document is disputed. However, there was a third reason for Henry II to mount a campaign in Ireland, and that was to distract from the murder of Thomas Becket. In December 1170, Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, had been murdered in his own cathedral by knights who believed they were acting in Henry's interest. The killing horrified Europe. Henry did not personally swing the sword, but the political and moral blame fell heavily on him. The scandal damaged his reputation and placed him under intense pressure from the Church. This is important because Henry's expedition to Ireland came less than a year after Becket's murder. Some claimed there was a connection, that Henry went to Ireland at least partly to escape the storm of outrage surrounding Becket's death. Modern historians are more cautious, but the timing is striking and the connection was certainly made by medieval observers. So was Ireland a distraction? Possibly, but we should be careful. Henry did not come to Ireland simply because he needed something to do after Becket's murder. There were real strategic reasons for intervention. Strongbow's power had to be controlled. The Norman foothold had to be regularised. Henry had long-standing ambitions to extend his authority, and the situation in Ireland presented an opportunity. But the Becket crisis may have made Ireland more attractive at that precise moment. So Henry's arrival in Ireland was driven by several overlapping motives. He wanted to control Strongbow. He wanted to assert royal authority. He wanted to take advantage of the Norman gains already made. And as we have just established, he may also have wanted distance from the Becket scandal, and he had a religious and political justification available to him, whether through laudabiliter, church reform, or the language of bringing order. On the 17th of October 1171, Henry landed near Waterford. He came with a large army. The traditional figure often given is around 500 knights and 4,000 men-at-arms and archers. Henry's royal army was transported to Ireland by a massive fleet, with some accounts estimating it to be around 400 ships. These numbers should always be treated with caution because medieval figures are often rounded or exaggerated, but there is no doubt that Henry arrived with an intimidating force, and the purpose of that force was clear. Henry wanted to overawe. He did not necessarily need to fight a series of major battles. The sheer size and royal status of his expedition were meant to make resistance look dangerous and submission look sensible. Imagine the scene, a massive fleet arriving in Waterford Harbour, hundreds of knights, thousands of soldiers, archers and attendants, horses, equipment, supplies, royal officials, and all of the power of the Angevin Empire with them. Just to be clear, Henry II wasn't just the King of England, he was the head of the Angevin Empire, a massive territory that encompassed England, parts of Wales, large parts of France, and very soon, Ireland. And the Gaelic response is one of the most important parts of this episode. Henry's arrival forced Gaelic kings into making difficult decisions. Many must have resigned themselves to the new situation. Strongbow and his commanders had wreaked havoc with forces numbering in the hundreds, and now here was the King of England with thousands of warriors. Many Gaelic kings were quick to pay homage and submit to Henry, including Dermot McCarthy of Desmond and Donald More O'Brien of Thomond. It wasn't just the military might of Henry's army that saw many Irish kings submit. As I mentioned, Henry II allegedly came with the blessing of the Pope, and the fear of excommunication would have been a powerful motive for many of the religious Gaelic kings. Henry's arrival also placed the men of Wexford in a dangerous position. Robert Fitzstephen was still their prisoner. It was one thing to defy Strongbow, it was another to hold a royal subject prisoner when the king himself had arrived with an army. According to the later narrative, the men of Wexford brought Fitzstephen to Henry and attempted to justify their actions by saying that Fitzstephen had attacked them first and that they had captured him lawfully. Henry's reaction was telling. Rather than immediately restore Fitzstephen to full freedom and favour, Henry kept him in custody for a time. This is one of the most important themes of Henry's visit. He came to Ireland as the master of both sides. To the Irish kings, he presented himself as a powerful overlord capable of receiving submission. As per their earlier agreement, Strongbow surrendered the kingdom of Leinster and the towns to the king. Henry II re-granted Leinster to Strongbow as a lordship, and he later granted him Wexford also, but Waterford and Dublin became and remained royal ports. Henry then toured Ireland, showing the clergymen and native kings who their new lord was. First up was Lismore and Cashel, then back to Waterford for a brief rest, before journeying by way of Kilkenny to Dublin, where Henry II arrived around November 11th. As he toured Leinster, Henry II collected the submissions of the Irish kings. However, several northern kings and Rory O'Connor refused to submit. Outside the city walls of Dublin, Henry II constructed a wooden palace on the site of modern-day Trinity College, where he arranged for a grand Christmas celebration, which was well attended by many Irish kings. Around this time, Henry also granted Dublin its first charter, on a piece of parchment measuring only 121 by 165 millimetres, which, extraordinarily, has survived to this day. Henry's charter to Dublin granted the right to live in the city to the men of Bristol, with whom the men of Dublin had enjoyed pre-existing economic relations. Henry II would remain in Ireland until Easter Sunday, April 17, 1172. However, when he set sail for England, he left behind another Norman lord that would act as a counterbalance to Strongbow, a loyal general and highly capable leader, and that man's name was Hugh de Lacy. We will be talking a lot more about Hugh de Lacy in future episodes, and we will return to him very soon. But for now, it is worth pausing to unpack some of the most significant consequences of Henry II's visit to Ireland. One of the most important was the Synod of Cashel, held in 1172. This major church gathering gave Henry's invasion a religious stamp of approval. It took the abstract ideas of church reform from Laudabiliter and put them straight into action. The Synod dealt with issues such as church discipline, marriage law, baptism, tithes, and the relationship between the Irish Church and the rest of Christian Europe. In simple terms, it helped bring the Irish Church more closely into line with the practices of the Roman Church. Of course, we should be careful not to exaggerate this. The Irish Church was not some completely isolated institution before Henry arrived. Reform had already been taking place in Ireland before the Normans. But Henry's arrival allowed him and his supporters to present English intervention as part of a wider programme of religious order and reform. That theme will become important again in future episodes, because Norman rule wasn't just military and political, and it didn't stop with the Church. Norman rule would impact trade, towns, agriculture, landholding, law, language, and the economy. The conquest did not simply bring new soldiers into Ireland, it brought new systems of lordship, new patterns of settlement, new religious institutions, and new links with England, Wales, and the wider Anglo-Norman world. So, Henry's departure from Ireland in 1172 marks the end of the first major phase of the Norman Conquest, and by the time the king left, many Gaelic rulers had made some form of submission to him or paid tribute. But significantly, Rory O'Connor, the High King of Ireland, had not personally submitted in the same way, and just to be clear, Ireland had not been fully conquered. Henry also did not declare himself King of Ireland. Instead, the title that developed was Lord of Ireland, and this marks the beginning of what historians call the Lordship of Ireland. For centuries, the kings of England would rule Ireland under that title. It would not be until 1541, under Henry VIII, that the title King of Ireland would be formally adopted. So as Henry sails away from Ireland, the story is far from over. The first phase of conquest has ended, but the island has not been pacified. Strongbow has been brought back under royal control. Hugh de Lacy has been placed in a position of enormous importance. The Norman towns have been secured. Some Gaelic kings have submitted, others have not. And Rory O'Connor remains a major force. So that's where we'll leave it for today. Next week, I'll be talking more about Hugh de Lacy and his new role and titles in Ireland. Henry had granted Hugh de Lacy the Lordship of Meath. Problem was, the Normans hadn't conquered Meath yet, and this will bring him into conflict with our old friend Tiernan O'Rourke. But I'll save that story for next time. Thanks once again for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.